The only bad fight I can remember is when I was trying to get her to stay home from going out, and I tossed her onto the waterbed, and she landed wrong and kind of twisted up her thumb underneath her.
Christi Jo Nichols was a loving mother, a wife, and a homemaker. In the days before her disappearance, she had spoken to multiple professionals seeking help regarding wanting to leave her abusive husband, only for her to vanish without a trace just hours later. Small-town police would dismiss the signs and rule Christy a runaway who deserted her family. However, bloodstains and whispers of violence in the home would say otherwise.
Still no answers.
9 years ago today.
What happened to these two young children?
Remains a mystery.
Urgent story unfolding right now. Who is missing? An unsolved murder.
Christi Jo Nichols was born September 6th of 1965 to her mother Connie and her father Ken Williams. Her family traveled around the state of Nebraska to make a living, meaning Christi attended school in North Platte, Ogallala, Odessa, Omaha, Big Springs, Lexington, and Overton throughout her youth. Christi was described as a timid, shy child, but was also friendly when she warmed up to someone. She loved her younger brother and sister and was always said to be very mothering to them. Connie saying that Christi was a good mother, very thoughtful and caring. At some point in her youth, Christi would be diagnosed with Sherman's disease, meaning she had a permanent curvature to her spine. In 1983, Christi graduated from Overton High School. She'd briefly attend Kearney State College before moving to the city of Gothenburg with her grandmother, Violet Williams. The following year, at 19 years old, Christi would marry a man named Mark Nichols, who is the son of former Gothenburg City Councilman Lowell Nichols, a Gothenburg native. Mark was around 4 years older than Christi and worked at a local gas station at the time. That same year, their daughter Lindsay was born, followed by their son Preston in 1986. Christi would turn 22 years old the following year, and Mark 26. The couple had been married for only 4 years, and in that short time, her 2- and 1-year-old children had become her pride and joy. Christi never felt that she had accomplished anything until she had her children. And there was something she could look at and say, "Hey, I did something pretty well. Nobody can do this any better." She was just so proud of her children. Christi was described as a quiet, very shy woman and a dedicated mother who was working as a part-time bartender and waitress at the time at Pete's Lounge, a local bar in the same town that the family lived in Gothenburg, Nebraska. Gothenburg is a city in Dawson County with a population of around 3,400 residents at the time, located in the heart of Nebraska's Farm Belt. It's a place with a strong sense of community, where everyone knew everyone, and if a neighbor was in trouble, it became everyone's business. The town is named after Gothenburg, Sweden. It is noted for its large number of residents of Swedish descent. Gothenburg was founded in 1882 by Olof Bergström. After coming to America from Sweden in 1881, Bergström worked for a time on the Union Pacific Railroad, then homesteaded in Dawson County near Gothenburg. Bergström made several return trips to Sweden to lead groups of settlers to Dawson County. In present day, it is home to 2 original Pony Express stations. Despite the beautiful life the couple was trying to build, in 1987, Mark and Christi were reported to be having marital problems. Mark had allegedly been monitoring his wife's phone calls, and he also allegedly had been physically abusing her. DV is thought to be at play here, to the point where Christi had to go to an emergency room one time after injuries that Mark had caused her. According to Mark, this fight happened because Christi wanted to go out, but he was trying to get her to stay home, which turned into an altercation where she started to hit and kick him. At that point, she allegedly burned the side of his neck with a cigarette she was holding. So he tossed her onto the waterbed, where she landed wrong and twisted her thumb underneath her. Christi was treated by Dr. Carol Severeid Shackleton, who was married to the chief of police. Dr. Shackleton had seen Christi several times before, stating that on Friday after Thanksgiving, she'd come into the emergency room complaining of a sore thumb and was acting like a scared rabbit. Dr. Shackleton didn't feel like Christi was telling her everything that had happened that night to cause the injury, but Mark was standing right outside of her room in the hallway during the visit. which is why it's so important to separate victims from their abusers. On another occasion, Christy confided in her cousin Deborah Fredericton, who claims that Christy showed her a bruise on her side that scared her. Deborah told her that she needed to get help from somebody, and when she asked how the bruise had occurred, Christy said that her and Mark had gotten into an argument where he had thrown her around. She just acted like it wasn't a big deal, like it was something that happened a lot. And all of these claims Mark would later deny. After all of that, Christy went to see an abuse counselor. When Mark eventually found out about this, he was said to be angry, and he made Christy promise that she wouldn't go again. But she ignored him, and she went anyways. 2 days before Christy Nichols would disappear, she went to speak with a divorce attorney named Claude E. Beckerman, who was located in Kozad, a town 11 miles away, so that her husband wouldn't find out. She would spend 2 hours at the office, Claude saying that Christy had told him she wanted to file for divorce but didn't have any money. After hearing what she had to say about her marital situation and seeing a bruise on her arm that she said was caused by her husband grabbing it, Claude said he told Christy not to worry about money and they'd go ahead with it. Claude then called the Dawson County Sheriff's Office, which referred him to County Attorney O'Rourke, who then referred him to Police Chief Shackleton. The attorney also called someone named Koch, who was the director of the Dawson County Parent-Child Center, and he set up a meeting between the director and Christy. The three of them would meet at the county sheriff's office the following day, on December 10th of 1987. During the meeting, Christy would tell Chief Shackleton about the thumb sprain that she had received during an argument with her husband in late November. But after she provided 2 versions of the incident with no proof, Chief Shackleton wasn't able to do anything. The plan was, however, for Christy to come in the following day on December 11th. This was so that she could speak with Koch about what she needed, what she wanted, and the resources that could be provided to her. But sadly, Christy would never make that meeting. Claude recounting, quote, "We do a lot of divorce work. We've handled hundreds of divorces. But she had to rank up in the top 5 of being distressed and upset and nervous and needing help. And when she explained certain abuses that she had been subjected to, we decided to make some telephone calls to call the authorities and report certain crimes that had taken place. I can say that day that Christy was in my office on December 9th, she was not panic-stricken to the point where she would ever run or leave, and in fact, she had made an appointment to come back to my office." End quote. Later that day, Christy and Mark would take their children to go Christmas shopping. This was the last afternoon she would spend with her family. Mark claims to have felt uncomfortable that day because he felt a lot of anger coming from Christy. Afterwards, the family went to eat dinner at Pizza Hut, then went to take the kids to see Santa and get pictures taken for the holidays. The family later returned home where a teenage babysitter named Diane Jansen was hired to watch the kids, while Christy and Mark went to play pool and shuffleboard at Pete's Lounge. Gary Geiken, who was not only the owner of the bar and Christy's boss, but also related to the couple, would later say that he seen an obvious tension between them that night, saying that Christy had actually also told him about their marital problems, and he was surprised to see them both there that night at the bar. It's thought that Christy may have gone to the bar with Mark that night because her mother Connie claims Christy had told her that the two were working things out. Christy had told her that she was willing to do anything that Mark wanted in order to keep her children, and had even agreed to quit her job at Pete's. But that also clashes with her speaking to the authorities that day. Unless that is something she had told her mother, but then was also secretly trying to get away without there being any danger involved. Because as the patterns seem to show, as well as how DV situations can also occur, when the violent partner finds out that the other partner is trying to leave, things can escalate. And so it does make sense if Christy was trying to do this secretly. The bar would close at midnight, which was now December 11th. After this, Christy and Mark would leave, stopping at the local Jack and Jill grocery store on the way home. Mark did the shopping while Christy waited at the front of the store and spoke with one of the clerks, whose name was Mike Ewan. According to Mike, Christy seemed really nervous and on edge, as if she was in a hurry to get somewhere. In the end, the couple purchased some breakfast items and milk. Around 1 a.m., while the babysitter Diane was sitting in the living room doing her homework, she heard one car door slam outside of the home. Diane claims Mark entered the home, paid her cash, and then she left and drove home. Now, Mark paying Diane was strange because after babysitting the kids for over a year, Mark had only paid her one time in the past, and that's when Christy was at work, and he'd come home before her. Diane stating that Christy was always the one to pay her, and she always asked her how the kids were doing, and she wanted to check in, and she always paid her with a check, not cash. However, on the night of December 11th, Diane claims to have stayed at the home for around 5 to 10 minutes after Mark arrived. However, she never saw Christy. She also claims to not have seen Mark bring in groceries. And Mark would later tell authorities that whether the groceries were brought inside the home or not that night was just a stupid little detail. Mark stating, quote, "We carried them into the house with us. We didn't leave them in the car. And the babysitter didn't see Christy because she went in a good 5 feet ahead of me and went straight through the hallway and into the bathroom by the kid's bedroom and stayed there for a good 15 minutes. End quote. And Diane would rebuke this by saying that if Christy had taken the path that Mark claimed, she would most likely not have seen her. However, she would have heard Christy walking on the hard tile floor and heard her going to the second floor and closing the bathroom door. Mark would claim to have last seen his wife when the two of them went to bed around 2 a.m. after the babysitter left. At 7 a.m., Mark claims to then have been woken up by his children. And this is when he realized that Christy wasn't asleep next to him and that she was missing. He then claims to have searched the home and realized that Christy had taken a suitcase full of her belongings. He also noticed that $30 in cash was missing from his billfold and that the tips that she normally kept in a jar were also missing. Christy's mother would then call the home around 8:30 or 9:30 a.m. And she was calling because she wanted to speak to her daughter and get an update on their marital issues. However, Mark would answer the phone. During this phone call, Mark would tell Connie that Christy was asleep in bed and the phone call ended. But Connie had a bad feeling. So she would call a State Department of Social Service worker who would then call the Nichols home. Now this phone call allegedly happened very close in time to when Connie had called the home. But this time, Mark told the social worker that Christy was out shopping. Mark would later defend these allegations and lies by saying that he didn't want to worry Connie because he had just thought his wife had left him during the night, and that he had later lied to the social service worker because, quote, "Who the hell am I to know who the hell is calling?" End quote. By 11 a.m., Mark had taken the children to Christy's grandmother's home, Violet Williams, and asked her to babysit. Mark claims he was crying and promising that he would find Christy and bring her home. But according to Violet's version of events, Mark did tell her that Christy was missing, and he was acting shook up. But oddly enough, he never asked Violet if Christy was at her home, or if she knew her whereabouts, or if she had seen her. Steps that you may take before just immediately assuming your wife is missing. Or if you were that concerned, you'd think you'd be asking her mother when she called, like, "Hey, have you seen her?" Or again, her grandmother, "Have you seen her?" Yet he allegedly didn't. He then claims to spend the next 2 hours driving around the area looking for Christy, but never saw her. There are, however, no witnesses to corroborate that Mark drove around town searching for his wife. You'd think there would be. It's a small town. If you were driving around, you'd be asking anyone that passes, "Hey, have you seen my wife, Christy?" And there'd be people to corroborate that. What is known is that Mark would return around 2.5 hours later to pick up the children. By 1:37 p.m., Mark would file a missing persons report, and Police Chief Shackleton would arrive at the home to speak to him. Again, keep in mind that this is a small town, and the police chief knew both Christy and Mark. Chief Shackleton would later admit to seeing a $half-dollar-sized amount of blood stained on the carpet in Christy and Mark's bedroom. However, he says that he wasn't looking for blood at the time, so he didn't think much of it. And despite allegedly being asleep and unaware of his wife leaving, Mark was able to tell police when she had left, that she had taken a suitcase and her purse with her, and was able to describe the contents of that suitcase perfectly, claiming that the suitcase contained jeans, a sweatshirt, a bra, and a jacket, and that the purse held a hairbrush, a pen, a lighter, a matchbook, lipstick, Neutrogena cream, a nail file, a mirror, and one piece of gum. A little specific. And I can tell you right now that my husband would have no clue what is in my purse. And let me know down below if you asked your husband right now if he would be able to describe to a T, to one piece of gum, what was in your purse. It's odd. Just saying. It's a little odd. We often speak about bad signs when someone disappears. And Christy left behind all of her important belongings, including her diamond jewelry, her driver's license, her social security card, makeup, and her wedding rings. She also never picked up her last paycheck from work. She also never took her car or her winter jacket with her. All items you'd think you'd need to collect if you were planning on running away in the middle of winter. In the time following Christy's disappearance being reported, the Nebraska State Patrol would investigate her disappearance. During the investigation, it is reported that Mark moved out of the family home a day after Christy disappeared. A few weeks later, it's reported that he boxed up all of their belongings and sold both their cars. But it seems that due to Mark's initial claims that his wife had ran out on him and she no longer wanted to raise their children, authorities just assumed that she had left on her own free will, which is ridiculous. But Christy's mother was not having it. She insisted that her son-in-law had been beating her daughter and that Christy had gone to see a lawyer about getting a divorce. And Mark would deny ever hitting his wife, except only playfully with a pillow, and pressed that they had been working on saving their marriage. And he also insisted that his wife was seeing another man and had threatened to divorce him on multiple occasions. Now, to add to Mark's claims, a note would end up being discovered under the front seat of the family's vehicle that Christy normally drove. Now, this note, which state crime labs confirmed was Christy's handwriting, was addressed from her to an unnamed man. In the contents of the note, it's written that she had considered leaving her husband and children. So even though Mark admitted to having marital problems with his wife, authorities were looking at it that it wasn't that far-fetched that she would have left to escape her marriage. Although her family continued to insist that she would never have abandoned her children. She loved those kids more than anything. Christy had also always kept in constant contact with her mother and grandmother, and she seemed to consistently be talking to them about her issues as well and telling other people in her life about her relationship with her husband and the abuse that she was suffering. But then out of nowhere, now she's just radio silent. One of the major issues with Christy's case not being investigated properly or soon enough is that there was a conflict of interest with them being close to Police Chief Shackleton. Many people have expressed that the Dawson County Sheriff's Office should have taken over the case sooner and feel that the initial probe into Christy's disappearance was inadequate and flawed, that foul play wasn't looked into soon enough. Interestingly enough, Police Chief Shackleton would eventually leave his position after pleading no contest to an official misconduct charge, later serving as a Gothenburg city councilman. When later asked, he would dispute any friendship clouding his judgment. And there may be something behind that, because Chief Shackleton had arrested Mark on multiple occasions in the past for things such as theft and burglary charges. But again, this was a small town back in the 80s, and if there was any case where there could have been some kind of, misconduct or just not proper training or just people assuming that, Mark was a good guy so he wouldn't have done something bad, it's this case, because Police Chief Shackleton seemed to believe that despite their relationship, Mark would not have been smart enough to commit a crime and get away with it like this. That there was no way he could have successfully covered up a homicide. Chief Shackleton would even be quoted in the Omaha World Herald in 1997 saying, quote, "At the time, I honestly thought she got into a semi-truck and just booked. The day she was in my office, I swear to God, she could have walked out of there and left the whole kit and caboodle behind. Those kids had her beside herself. They had my office half torn up. They were into everything, and she was to the point where if we hadn't been standing there, she'd have slaughtered them. But the more it goes, the longer I wonder about it." End quote. It wouldn't be until 2 months into Christy's vanishing that state and federal agencies would be brought in to investigate Christy's disappearance. A city dump would be searched after tips indicated that evidence would be found there, but no clues were found. By September, 200 volunteers would still actively be meeting to conduct searches for Christy, the Salvation Army providing food for the searchers. The following month, 300 volunteers searched a 200 square mile area around Gothenburg, being recruited to walk roadsides, others driving all-terrain vehicles through the rough bush or taking horses into the rugged canyons of Dawson County. In one instance, search dogs would scratch furiously at several mounds of gravel near some ponds by the town of Brady. After state troopers dug a dozen holes, nothing was found. Her case would eventually be featured on NBC's Unsolved Mysteries, which I definitely recommend checking out because Mark is interviewed in this documentary. Don't know why he ever agreed to do this, but I'm glad he did. And it's very interesting to hear him sit there and speak about his wife's disappearance. But despite the massive media coverage, it failed to shed any light on Christy's whereabouts. A search warrant would eventually be obtained, just a little too late, in my opinion. This allowed Chief Shackleton and 2 state patrol officers to go through the Nichols home with a fine-toothed comb. And all 3 of them would once again sit there and look at that spot of blood on the carpet of their bedroom. And the 3 of their brains together decided that it wasn't anything because it wasn't a big enough spot of blood. But that small $50 amount of blood on that carpet would turn out to be a much larger stain once properly investigated. The spot of blood had actually soaked into the underpadding underneath, where a larger stain the size of a coffee saucer would be found. Lab tests would later indicate that the blood was type B, which was Christy's blood type. It would also be revealed that trace amounts of blood were found in the inside of the trunk of Mark's 1977 Mercury Cougar. There wasn't enough blood, however, to indicate that Christy was dead. And when questioned, Mark told the authorities that the blood that they found was Christy's menstrual blood. Now, it seems that at the time, testing wasn't actually advanced enough to determine whether blood was menstrual blood or just regular circulatory blood. but there is a difference. There seems to be specific cells and proteins that are unique to menstrual blood, like endometrial cells, which can be detected through DNA analysis. It's a lot of science that I don't fully understand, but there is testing to determine whether one is or the other. But it is unclear if that testing was ever done. However, my opinion, I don't really believe Mark. And rumors would whisper over the town, as the townspeople speculated whether Christy's body was buried at the local railroad overpass, or entombed in some other construction project, such as the overpass in a town that was under construction at the time of her disappearance, or covered by concrete in a local driveway, tossed in an abandoned well or lake, or buried in a rural area outside of town. Christy's family no longer believes that she is alive, and they still wholeheartedly believe that she would have never left her children. And these theories and rumors may have some weight to them, because a major construction project by the State Department of Roads was underway at the time of Christy's disappearance, which included a building of an overpass above Gothenburg's 6th Street and another above some Union Pacific Railroad tracks in US 30. A tremendous amount of gravel fill was also used at both locations during the winter of 1987 to 1988. The running theory at the time was that if Christy had been murdered and the killer had buried her under this gravel, by the morning, no one would have been able to see that there was any digging because it was just a bunch of rocks. Due to this, cadaver dogs would be brought in, however, there was nothing found. State police did seem to consider using a powerful X-ray device that could, scan objects underground. However, it is again unclear if that was ever done. Nebraska State Patrol investigator Steve Mueller saying, quote, "We are not going to stop looking. Christy will not be forgotten," end quote. They would end up performing a polygraph test on Mark, however, the results were said to be inconclusive. Although Mark would later tell newspapers that he had taken 6 tests in one day and passed them all, and that he was cleared of all involvement. Investigators would also locate the man that Christy had wrote this note to, and he would be ruled out as a suspect as well. The unnamed man claimed that he had become acquainted with Christy because she was lonely and she needed someone to talk to. And after all of that, Christy's grandmother Violet would also claim that Christy's daughter Lindsay had told her that, quote, "Daddy put mommy in a bucket and put her in green water," end quote. After Christy's disappearance, Lindsay and Preston would be in and out of foster care, as well as the custody of both sets of grandparents. Connie would spend thousands of dollars and was awarded permanent temporary custody, only for the children to later be removed and placed in foster care in the town of Brady. They would then be placed in the custody of their paternal grandparents, Llewellyn and Verna Nichols. Mark would then attempt to sue Connie and her husband, Greg Stanley, in court for defamation of character. However, after a 2-day trial, the charges were dropped and she was acquitted. In the end, Christy's parents amassed $50,000 in legal fees as well as expenses while trying to search for their daughter. As the snow melted 3 months after Christy's disappearance, in March of 1988, both the suitcase and the purse that Mark claimed Christy had taken were found by a trucker near a tree at an Interstate 80 rest stop near Maxwell, Nebraska. This location was 22 miles from Gothenburg. To the surprise of investigators, inside of that suitcase were all of the items that Mark had described. Other items found included her billfold, which contained her driver's license, but there was no money in it, and there was also a matchbook from Pete's Lounge. Authorities stated that it looked as if whoever had placed them there wanted them to be found. But Mark would also deny describing all of the contents of that suitcase in detail, saying that the authorities were lying. Mark would later tell the Lincoln Star-Journal, quote, "Yeah, I'm supposed to have buried her in the brand new overpass right in the center of town. Now, God Jesus, how would I have done that? Somebody's got to be real ingenious to do that, to find the right time to be able to pull something off like that. They would just have to be a genius. They can't solve a case, and they've got to find a guinea pig. They've got to find somebody to road in this fire, and it's me, because I have no alibi. I really don't. If they were to find her body a couple miles west or north or south of here, hey, they come and get me, no problem. But I'm guilty of nothing. They're all in cahoots together. I ain't got a chance in hell." End quote. Which is interesting to me because it kind of seems like the opposite, like Mark was getting let go left and right, and her family was the one that was pressing that it was him. In 1989, Christy's 51-year-old aunt, who was a divorced mother of 2 named Joanne Niss, would leave her job as a secretary for a North Platte insurance agency to become a secretary and private detective for Dennis Wellen, a private investigator in Omaha. Joanne would dedicate the next decades of her life to tracking down information and investigating her niece's disappearance. By 1990, Mark filed for divorce from Christy, claiming desertion. According to Mark, she left on her own accord, abandoning him and their children. And by 1994, he had gotten remarried to a woman named Lori, and the two were living in Seligman, Missouri. Mark's children had also been returned to his care after a lengthy custody battle for them. He essentially started a brand new life with a new wife in a new state. But Mark's life rebrand wasn't pure bliss. On March 20th of 1992, an arrest warrant was filed in Lincoln County against Mark for third-degree assault against his current wife, and he would move away from the state before it could be served on him. It would also be revealed that in 1990, he would be sentenced to 20 days in the Dawson County Jail for false reporting after he made up a story about being robbed at the Gothenburg gas station where he worked. The children were also said to be kept isolated from their grandparents, who wouldn't see them for several years, and their Christmas cards returned. Meanwhile, Christy's mother, Connie, would spend her years mailing letters to newspapers on the anniversary of her daughter's disappearance, asking anyone with information to call authorities, and explaining in detail the loss felt by the family. She would also establish a fund to finance the search efforts. Connie would tell the Omaha World Herald, quote, "It takes its toll every time you try and write the letters. They try to go on, but it's something you think about every day. I don't think there's much doubt in anybody's mind about what happened. It's just that they have to have everything in place to proceed, and we can never get everything in line where it could get a conviction. Somebody has to know something, probably not a lot. But I believe somebody saw something and is afraid of coming forward, or at the time didn't think they saw something important. At this point, we don't know what we can do to get closure. There just isn't anything to do but wait for somebody to come forward and say, 'Here's what I saw,' or 'Here's what I know.'" End quote. Christy's father, Ken, would tell the same paper in 2007, quote, "I have no evidence of foul play. I'd just like to know what happened. My thoughts are still the same. I'd like to find answers. Somebody has to know something. Whether she's dead or alive or left on her own, or whether she was murdered." End quote. 7 years later, in 1997, Joanne and Dennis Wellen would make a formal request to convene a grand jury investigation. However, that was denied, citing that there was no body, making it very difficult to pursue a criminal case. They would then request a federal environment agency to remove several suspicious barrels from the bottom of a sandpit lake near the town of Brady. Joanne would be quoted in the Omaha World Herald in 2012 saying, quote, "It's been extremely hard. My heart goes out to people all over the country when I hear about somebody missing. The not knowing is very frustrating. You want the guilty to be brought to justice. I'm staying on this case like a fly on honey. It's something I'm pretty much devoted my life to." End quote. As of 2023, both of Christy's parents were still living and they were still fighting for answers. And police are still looking for her body. But what do you all think happened here? Do you think that this is a case that was botched? Do you think this case could have been solved a long, long time ago? Do you think it's pretty cut and dry what happened here? Or do you think that Christy may have ran away? In my opinion, I think Christy's husband had something to do with it. I think maybe he found out that she was finally going to leave him and that she was going through the legal process. Who knows? It's a small town. Somebody may have said something to him. They may have seen Christy, the town over in Brady. We also have to remember she had met up with Police Shackleton earlier that day. Could there have been a conflict of interest there? Could he have said something to him? Could have someone at the sheriff's office said something to him? Maybe someone seen her walking out of there. Maybe one of the kids said something. We don't know. And it may have just made him snap. I think it's a great injustice that the police left that bloodstain there and did not investigate it thoroughly from the start. I think there was definitely a lot of, good old boys club possibly going on. It's a small town. We have to remember that back in the 80s. It's blatantly clear that everyone thought Mark was stupid and that he wouldn't have been able to pull off a crime like that. But yet here we are, decades later, and Christy is still not found, and her children were not able to grow up knowing their mother. She was not able to spend the rest of her life raising her children and seeing her grandchildren and living the life she should have. She was making the proper steps to get away from this man, and yet she disappeared that same day. We've seen the situation happen over and over again, yet Mark is still walking free and Christy is still missing. But again, that is just my opinion from the evidence that we do know. But let me know what you think. Let's have a conversation down below. At the time of her disappearance, Christi Jo Nichols was described as a white female standing 5'9" tall and weighing around 120 pounds. She had brown hair and green eyes. Both of her ears were pierced, and she had a scar above her left eye, as well as a scar on her abdomen. Foul play is suspected in Christy's disappearance, and is still classified as a homicide decades later. She is now a grandmother, and possibly even a great-grandmother, but she will never know that. Her family never got to experience that with her, and Mark is still the only suspect in her case. If you have any information as to what may have happened to Christy, please speak up, please say something, please give this family closure decades later. I'll have the information down below. Christy deserves justice. I hope you all stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video.